Thank you for watching QTV with the news. My name is Diana Sumbwe. We take a look at stories making headlines. President Edgar Lungu says he is heartbroken that only 2% from Zambia's abundant water resource is currently being harnessed for irrigation. And government has withdrawn the motor vehicle replacement allowance for cabinet ministries effective January 1st, 2019 as part of austerity measures. And now details in our news. President Edgar Lungu says he is heartbroken that only 2% from Zambia's abundant water resource is currently being harnessed for irrigation. President Edgar Lungu says the country's water resource has the potential to irrigate about 3 million hectares of land. He states that despite this abundant water resource, however, he has also observed that only 28% is harnessed for hydropower generation, while 70% remains untapped. Speaking when he officiated at the handover ceremony of the newly constructed $28.3 million United States dollars Momboshi Dam in Chisamba district, President Lungu thought that Zambia could do better than this. President Lungu says he has nonetheless been informed that there are 4 other project sites in the country with the potential for irrigation development which have already been identified. He states that government's target is to roll out irrigation infrastructure development to increase the volume of water being harnessed for irrigation from 2% to 20% by the year 2030. President Lungu says through this development, it is expected that Zambia's vision to transform into a middle-income country will be released by the year 2030. He says he is therefore delighted that the Momboshi Dam, whose capacity is to irrigate 6,000 hectares, is already bearing fruits as evidenced by the 230 housing units that have benefited from the project.
Ladies and gentlemen, as government, we are busy to roll out our water irrigation infrastructure projects of this kind across the country. Let me make this very clear that as government, we are busy to roll out bulk water irrigation infrastructure projects of this kind, like the one we are witnessing here, throughout the country. This achievement, the serious challenge, and the wake-up call to all contractors in all sectors of our economy who have a tendency of abandoning works and failure to finish projects within the stipulated contract time frame. This achievement by AFEC here is a serious challenge and a wake-up call to all contractors in all sectors of our economy who have a tendency of abandoning works and failure to finish projects within the stipulated contract time frame. This is uncalled for, and the progressive practice is prevalent in most of the projects across the country, and it's costly for us in our quest to foster national development. Let me take this opportunity to challenge all contractors to emulate the work culture and dedication which Africa has exhibited here, but not just completing construction works ahead of schedule, but also by constructing the dam with an equal water standard.
Government has withdrawn the motor vehicle replacement allowance for cabinet ministers effective January 1st, 2019 in adherence to the austerity measures government has put in place. Secretary to Cabinet Roland Musiska says it is fiscally untenable to continue providing the allowance at the fixed monthly rate of 32,715 kwacha 20 ngwe for each cabinet and provincial minister. In a statement to Zanisi Lusaka, Dr. Musiska states that this is why government has made the decision to withdraw the motor vehicle replacement allowance. He says all affected and eligible officers shall revert back to their previous conditions of service, which require that they are provided with personal to holder vehicles and furnished houses. Dr. Musiska explains that request by members of parliament to have the motor vehicle replacement allowance extended to them was unjustified as they were not entitled to it in their conditions of service. He notes that emoluments presently payable to ministers and parliamentary residing officers are provided under the Ministerial and Parliamentary Officers Emoluments Act. The Ministry of Labour has dismissed as fake news social media reports that employees who worked between 1990 and 2018 have the right to get benefits of up to 26,000 kwacha from the Department of Labour. Permanent Secretary Babna Mlenga says members of the public should ignore the social media report as it is not coming from his ministry. Mr. Mlenga states that it is in fact not the mandate of the Department of Labour to pay benefits to workers. Speaking during a media briefing, Mr. Mlenga said the mandate of the department is to mediate and settle disputes between an employer and an employee. He explains that it is from the outcome of such dispute resolutions that an employer who is found wanting is usually required to pay the employee through the Department of Labour. Mr. Mlenga states that it is therefore imperative that the Department of Labour does not keep money relating to the employment of any persons. He says people wishing to consult the Ministry of Labour are free to visit any Labour office in the district of all provinces or call the toll line 7010 on any network.
We are concerned because that particular information on social media is happening, that as people get that, it's even asking them to forward to other people, and they start asking for certain information, and we therefore want to warn members of the public not to fall for that scam. I'd like further to mention that as a ministry, through the Department of Labour, we handle cases, yes, where we're able to mediate between an employer and an employee. And there are cases where the employer will be asked to remit the money through the department for specific cases. And when those cases come up, we don't start sending things on social media. I will tell you that this particular one doing its round is bad because they've even created a fake website purporting that that's the website for the Ministry of Labour, when in fact it is not. You will notice that the website for the Ministry of Labour is very clear, and in this particular case it doesn't even have any capital letters in it. The one they've created is a fake with capital ZM at the end, which is contrary to the website as established by SPAT Zambia.
Information and Broadcasting Services Minister Dora Silia has challenged the media in the country to uphold professionalism and safeguard the journalism profession. Officiating at a Ministry of Information and Media personnel meeting in Lusaka, Ms. Silia also called for an end to political polarization of the media. Ms. Silia, who is also Chief Government spokesperson, is encouraging journalists to put the respect of the journalism profession first before personal gains. She says there is need to set standards that give honor and respect to journalists in the country in a way that sets them apart from the rest of the community.
We in journalism seem to be quite challenged. And it is not about whether one is in a private or government institution. It's really about the craft, that today we take everything out, the media houses we work for, the technology we use, and just say, this craft, what is it worth, and does it need protection in our country? And how are we going to separate ourselves from those who are masquerading to be journalists? We ask, does the public actually appreciate that there are minimum standards? Or is it like what I saw going on in the blog, that it's about, oh, who's paying for the lunch? And when we meet as journalists, it's always about who's going to refund me the transport costs. We have to diffuse that perception about our craft as far as the public is concerned. And it won't be done by anybody else except ourselves. I truly hope that this polarization that has happened in the past has really ended. The politicians know how to manage themselves. The NGOs know how to manage themselves. But we have a responsibility on behalf of the people of Zambia to interpret a number of issues for them. We can't do it unless we continue to gain respect. And we're losing it fast because people know they can get whatever information they want from somewhere else. And the only way they're going to value whether it's the newspapers or it's the radios or it's the television programs, is because first our content is content that is going to respond to what the people want to hear.
And making a presentation on statutory regulations and the legal profession, Law Association of Zambia LA's President Eddie Mwitwa noted the need for the media fraternity to have statutory regulations. Mr. Mwitwa says the legal fraternity is able to operate effectively because it is guided by statutory regulations.
Statutory regulation has helped to preserve the nobility and dignity of the legal profession. Now, as we consider the question of regulating the journalism profession, I submit that we must be alive to the unique characteristics of journalism. We must also answer a few simple but perhaps yet complex questions, namely, why should the journalism profession be regulated? In other words, is there a problem with the current state of affairs? And why is it a problem? And who should regulate the journalism profession? And again, why? And how should the journalism profession be regulated? And perhaps above all, will the regulation of the journalism profession serve public interest, or is it meant to serve private interest of journalists? And lastly, why the previous efforts to regulate the journalism profession failed, and what can be done differently? Last month, I was invited to a discussion by one non-governmental organization looking at this same topic of regulation of the media. And I was intrigued to note that these are conversations or debates that have been going on for more than 10 years. More than 10 years. So what can we, more than 20? More than 20 years. So what can we do differently? I do not have immediate answers to these questions, but I look forward to participating in the deliberations this morning and beyond. As last, we stand ready to assist in answering these questions in line with our statutory mandate, and we can only wish the journalism profession well. Long live journalism in Zambia.
Former President Rupia Banda says the ongoing trade wars between the United States and China, meant to impose barriers on trade, have major implications on Africa's economic growth. Mr. Banda says the global economy is likely to experience a period of sluggish trade, with risk of further slowing down as a result of the trade wars. He was speaking during a special high-level stakeholders appreciation and engagement dinner on the occasion of the 135th Trade and Development Bank Board of Directors meeting in Ethiopia. The 135th Trade and Development Bank meeting is being held under the theme Integrating and Advancing the Region's Economies. Prominent among the people who attended the dinner were former Ethiopian Prime Minister Dislegan Haile Mariam, Ethiopian Minister of Finance and Economy Ahmed Shide, Ethiopia's first female Chief Justice Miza Essenafi, National Bank of Ethiopia Governor Abdallah Hamdok, and a member of the TDB Eminent Panel of Experts. Mr. Banda co-chairs the Eminent Panel of Experts on the TDB board with the President of Seychelles, Mr. Danny Fer. And Mr. Banda, who is Zambia's fourth Republican president, has emphasized the need for African countries to reduce dependence on exports of primary products. He is urging them to instead add value to products and improve the diversification of their economies. Meanwhile, Mr. Banda has commended the government of Ethiopia for having young and dynamic leadership that has embraced gender parity. This is according to a statement issued by the First Secretary for Press and Tourism at the Zambian mission in Ethiopia, Inutu Mpango Mwanza. The Zambia Railways Limited, ZRL, says the effecting of statutory instrument number 10 of 2018, which compels transporters of heavy cargo to use railway transport, has improved its operations. Company Chief Executive Officer Christopher Msonda has told a media briefing that the Zambia Railways Limited has since recorded about 25% increase in its haulage tonnage. And Mr. Msonda has disclosed that the Zambia Railways Limited also plans to increase the the number of cooperatives working on improving the road track from the current 12 to 15. He says from September this year, the time that cooperatives replaced the private players, the maintenance of the railway tracks from Ndola on the Copperbelt to Mlobezi in Western Province has recorded tremendous improvement. He says there has also been improved accountability.
We're also saying that in the last 3 months, they've been doing more of lifting and packing of the track. Lift, put ballast, pack and repair. And what we've done is that one of the guarantees they wanted us to give them is assured payment, monthly payments to these cooperatives. For the first 3 months, we took over the responsibility of ensuring that each cooperative gets paid on agreed rates. So this has motivated the issue of operation. The challenges we had in the past was that there's a cooperative, there's a contractor owner, you pay him, he was responsible to go and pay his fellow workers, and you find that he didn't pay them. And when they complain, he says, Zambia Railways have not paid us. That's why we're not paying him. So that has run away now, and we are ensuring that we are paying them on the same pay day of Zambia Railways.
Meanwhile, the Zambia Railways Limited Board Chairperson Luwinda Linyama has warned people encroaching on the land belonging to the railway company that they will not be spared. Mr. Linyama says enough warning has been given for too long and that the company will not give any notice, but that it will just move in and bring down any structures built on the company land. He has since expressed gratitude to the Lusaka City Council, who recently demolished buildings in Lusaka's Kamala trading area that were built less than 50 meters away from the railway line.
But like we have always advised and implored members of the public who are sitting in these areas that it would be helpful if we engaged in terms of a process of them withdrawing from these encroached areas rather than us using force or demolishing structures. So we encourage members of the public who are faced with this predicament to call on our estates people and come up with solutions in terms of a disengagement from the area which they have encroached. So all stakeholders have been involved, the Council, Ministry of Lands and several ministries that are in the process which are affected by these particular issues on the encroachments. As stated by the MD, this process is continuing because as we speak right now, there's someone who's being allocated Zambia Railways land illegally. But we've given sufficient warning and we are not going to hesitate to demolish. Just a few weeks ago, I think there was a demolition exercise and we are grateful to the Lusaka City Council for being very vigilant in the process. Some buildings were demolished right here in Kamala.
Government says it is committed to seeing through the implementation of the national policy on climate change, which was launched by Vice President Inongewina in April 2016. Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture, Lands and Natural Resources Chairperson Maxas Ngonga has acknowledged that climate change is an issue that is adversely affecting livelihoods in Zambia. Mr. Ngonga notes that the country is experiencing various climate-related hazards such as droughts, extreme temperatures, flash floods, and dry spells. He says in an effort to cope with the effects of climate change, the government therefore launched the National Policy on Climate Change, which he says the government is committed to implementing. Mr. Ngonga said this during the dissemination workshop for recent research results on managing forests for sustainable development and climate-smart agriculture.
Climate change is an issue that is affecting livelihoods in Zambia adversely. In common parlance, it may not be called climate change. However, it is apparent and obvious to all of us that something has fundamentally changed in terms of climate in Zambia. Evidence shows that Zambia has over the past years experienced a number of climate-related hazards, including droughts and dry spells. The country is going through such a dry spell even right now as we sit. Other hazards that we have experienced include seasonal and flash floods and extreme temperatures. This is evidence even from the days that we're going through. Coping with the effects of climate change led to the Zambian government's launch of the National Policy on Climate Change in April 2016 by our own Vice President, our Honor the Vice President, Mrs. Inonge Mutukwawina. Ladies and gentlemen, science drives the day-to-day implementation of this policy. The day-to-day implementation of the policy is driven by facts, and that's why today's dissemination is very, very important.
And IAPRI Research Fellow Hambulo Ngoma presented some of the research results on managing forests for sustainable development and climate-smart agriculture from the recent research study.
So our research is trying to inform how best deforestation can be addressed in Zambia. So we did a number of things. One was to look at what drives deforestation, and in particular we looked at charcoal. We found that charcoal production is a big issue, it's one of the big drivers of deforestation. But we do think that sustainable charcoal production methods, efficient cook stoves, and other sustainable interventions could help reduce the dependence on charcoal. Secondly, we looked at what really is the value of these forest resources, because the premise is that if you can't value something, then you probably cannot conserve it. And when you look at the National Forestry Policy of 2014, there is a recognition that the value of forest resources in Zambia are not well understood. So our work is trying to inform that process. What we found was that we focus on non-timber forest products for a start, which is a large component of forest resources. And we did find that they can contribute to the national gross domestic product of Zambia by 2.3%, up to 2.3% of the Zambia national domestic gross product. That's huge. That's bigger than what is estimated, for example, in the National Forest Policy. But also we went ahead to look at what policies then can be implemented to sustainably manage forests. And we looked at command and control, which is a traditional ban and fine, or using protected forest areas. We looked at community forest management, we looked at payment for environmental services, and basically our findings show that payments for environmental services, in particular to individuals, would have the largest conservation outcomes. But we think that combining that with community forest management probably would have better outcomes for forest conservation.
The Human Rights Commission, HRC, has welcomed the directive by President Edgar Lungu to the Zambia Correctional Services, ZCS, that it begins to treat inmates with dignity. The Human Rights Commission thinks that the guidance by President Lungu when he swore in Zambia Correctional Services Commissioner General Chileshe Chisela to respect the rights and dignity of inmates is extremely significant. Spokesperson William Mulea says this is particularly that it is coming from the Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces, under whom the Zambia Correctional Services falls. Mr. Mulea has told Q News in a statement that above all, the Human Rights Commission welcomes President Lungu's directive because it is consistent with government's human rights obligations. He states that the executive commitment to promoting and protecting the human rights could not have also come at a better time than during the countdown for the Human Rights Day that falls on 10th December.
So we have no doubt that such guidance will be implemented. Secondly, it's consistent with Zambia's obligations of, implementing the rights of inmates. And it's also consistent with the actions which the government has been taking of late, particularly the actions by President Edgar Lungu, who has been pardoning inmates under his constitutional prerogative of mass powers, and also commuting death sentences to life imprisonment, which is one of the best human rights practices ever in the world. So we welcome that statement, and it's coming at a better time now when the international community, including Zambia, are in the countdown mode of celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the country will be celebrating at the Mulungushi International Conference Center on Monday, 10th December 2018. So it gives us impetus that as a country at the highest political level, we're able to see where human rights violations are taking place, and also offering commitment on redressing such human rights challenges. So we have
Civil Aviation Authority CAA Director General Gabriel Lesa is the new African Civil Aviation Commission AFCAC President for the period 2018 to 2021. Tefera Mekonnen of Ethiopia has also been appointed as the new AFCAC Secretary General. Announcing their appointment during the 29th Extraordinary and 30th Ordinary Plenary Session of AFCAC in Livingstone, the AFCAC President Henry Heya El Ado said Africa is at a critical point in its aviation industry and needs transformational leadership to be at the helm of driving the civil aviation agenda. Mr. Ado says he is confident that Mr. Lesa and Mr. Tefera's appointment as the new AFCAC President and Secretary General respectively will help address some of the challenges in the civil aviation sector. And Mr. Lesa says Zambia's taking over of the presidency of AFCAC is another milestone for the country's aviation. He states that his appointment has also come at an opportune time in Africa's civil aviation industry as the importance of global, African and local civil aviation is growing. Mr. Lesa says that some of his priority areas will be improvement of civil aviation safety and security standards. He is confident that Africa's civil aviation will align with the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as well as the African Union's Agenda 2063. Mr. Lesa becomes the first Zambian to become president of the Africa Civil Aviation Commission AFCAC, taking over from Mr. Ado, an engineer from Egypt. This is contained in a statement made available to Q News by CAA Public Relations Manager Sapiso Zimba. Minister of Tourism Charles Banda has affirmed government's commitment to strengthening of community-based natural resources management CBNRM programs. Speaking during the official opening of the National Consultative Forum on Strengthening of Community Resources Boards in Zambia's game and open management areas, Mr. Banda said the country has enough lessons to design its own CBNRM program that speaks to the Zambian conditions. Mr. Chanda says that his ministry, through Department of National Parks and Wildlife, will ensure that an enabling environment is created for full community participation. He states that the ministry is also aware about the various challenges faced in the management of the game management areas GMA and delays in the disbursement of funds. Mr. Banda, however, notes that this ministry, through the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, will commence a process of consultation with their Royal Highness and communities at large to see how they can achieve a win-win situation so that there is balance.
As Minister responsible for the Ministry of Tourism and also for the management of wildlife, I'm fully aware of the role that our communities, through the community resource boards and your Royal Highness's play in the management of the wildlife and natural resources in game management areas. In order to ensure the wildlife and its habitat, we need in order to secure the wildlife and its habitat, we need to develop stronger community partnerships through community-based natural resources management. As a government, under the careful leadership of His Excellency President Edgar Chagwalungu, we are committed in supporting the strengthening of community-based natural resources management programs. We have enough lessons to design our own Zambian CBNRM program that speak to the Zambian condition. My ministry and through the Department of National Parks and Wildlife will ensure that an enabling environment is created for full participation of all the players involved.
Speaking at the same event, CBNRM Forum Chairperson Dr. Rogers Luviro encouraged government through the Department of National Parks to work together with communities, cooperating partners and all players in the sector to find a workable GMA governance model. And Community Resource Board CRB Association President Felix Shanungu expressed concern that the precious natural resources and wildlife will be depleted completely if things are not improved.
We know that some efforts have been done to ensure that the concerns of the communities are attended to. But we also would like to emphasize that we still need more effort through the Office of the Director of Parks, Ministry of Tourism, that we work together to ensure that our people are able to realize the necessary benefits from the management of wildlife resources. I'm not going to be speaking long, but there are a number of things that we will highlight, which the President of the Association will be commenting on. We cannot shy away that we have a common interest, government, communities, private sectors, our brothers, our friends, that the management of the resources, especially the government areas, requires a focus. We want to take the government to consider ensuring that the resource ownership, beneficiation is discussed and that communities can be given that what to do.
Our theme for this year, this conference, is improving general performance and stability through developing ownership and management communities. I must confess that when we first planned to hold this general conference, we were very skeptical, looking at our financial inability to manage this conference. As our association too faces multiple financial challenges. However, I'm happy that our cooperative partners come on board to assist, meet all the resources required. We thank you all for this help.
The National Biosafety Authority has revealed that it has granted 3 distributors new permits to import products that may contain genetically modified organisms. Authority Executive Officer and Registrar Lacson Tonga has explained that the decision was arrived at after a risk assessment was conducted by the Scientific Advisory Committee, who later recommended to the board for permit issuance after finding the various products to be safe for the human, animals and the environment. Mr. Tonga says the 3 applicants are Cold Chain, Horizon and Insco distributors, who were among 12 retailers, wholesalers and distributors that applied for the new and renewal permits. He says the 3 distributors will only import about 80% of the products they initially applied for.
We have also issued renewal permits to place on the market or sell products which contain GMOs to Cold Chain, Zambian brands and Horizon distributors. As you may be aware, permits to place on the market are valid for a period of 6 months to ensure compliance by the distributors, retailers and wholesalers so that they adhere to the standards and the provisions of the Act. We would also like to announce here that we have other applications for new permit to import that are at various stages, which include laboratory, which should also include the need for laboratory tests of the intended products for import, risk assessment and further review. We are happy with the positive response we have continued to receive from distributors, retailers, wholesalers in them complying with the provisions of the law to ascertain what their products constitute. These are clients that may want to export their products, and we are happy that we are certifying their products. However, we have continued with our spot and compliance checks, and during one of the operations we found 1 distributor wanting and other 4 retailers and 4 retailers. To that effect, we have called for such distributors and retailers to put down their products. The major reason is that their products which they displayed on the shelves did not undergo risk assessment.
Meanwhile, the Zambia National Farmers Union President Jervis Zimba says authorities trying to propagate the importation of genetically engineered foods into the country do not mean well to the growth of their agenda. In a statement, Mr. Zimba says the country is a non-GMO and that the maneuvers towards legitimizing GMOs will have far-reaching implications on farmers. Ministry of National Development Planning Permanent Secretary Chola Chavala says Zambia has made significant progress in ensuring equitable sexual and reproductive health services in the past 20 years. Speaking when officiating at the breakfast meeting with news editors, Mr. Chavala disclosed that fewer women are dying in pregnancy and childbirth, as evidenced by the drop in maternal mortality rates from 726 in 2002 to 398 in 2014. He notes that more women are able to decide if, when and how often to have children, as contraceptive prevalence rates have increased from 9% in 1992 to 45% in 2014. And Mr. Chavala revealed that more mothers have now access to maternal health services, as reflected by a rise in births assisted by a skilled attendant from 50% in 1992 to 64% in 2014. He, however, says more needs to be done, as studies also reveal significant inequalities and discrimination that limit women and girls' opportunities to develop to their full potential.
Population issues are complex, and we need to bring on board the various variables. And in my view, reproductive health is just one of the major key variables. There are many other key variables that we need to pay attention on. And the UNFPA has that broader mandate to ensure that you shepherd all of us to portray the multi-dimensional nature of population and development. And that has been done very well. If you read the demographic dividend report, really, we pay tribute to UNFPA for working closely with us, variables, jointly, underscoring the need for simultaneous investment in all these factors I'm talking about: health, education, economic development, and all that. And colleagues from the media, they need to be commended and deeply appreciated, and we need to scale it up.
And speaking at the same event, United Nations Population Fund UNFPA warned that Zambia risks failing to achieve the Vision 2030 of leaving no one behind if women and girls are not abreast with information on sexual reproductive health. UNFPA Country Representative Gift Malunga says there is need to ensure that women and girls easily access information on sexual reproductive health.
But we are also aware, as my colleague indicated, that many women and girls do not have access to information and even services, specifically sexual and reproductive health services, and therefore they are unable to reach their full potential in life. And so, you know, when this happens to millions of women and girls, the country is unable to make progress towards achieving Vision 2030. I like the mantra in the 7th National Development Plan that no one should be left behind, in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So we cannot leave women and girls behind. It is acknowledged that when we talk about sexual and reproductive health, we are touching on the most intimate and private aspects of people's lives, which can also be a bit difficult. I don't know, maybe it's not difficult, but this is our view that perhaps it's difficult for the media to write about or to discuss publicly. Furthermore, there are cultural sensitivities and taboos surrounding sexuality, and often people try to refrain from discussing issues of sexuality and reproduction.
The Zambian government has reaffirmed its commitment to finding a sustainable resolution to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, as well as towards its solidarity with the state of Palestine in its quest for self-determination. Government has further reaffirmed its commitment to working closely with both the governments of Palestine and Israel, as well as the international community, towards resolving the ongoing conflict. Speaking at the commemorations to mark the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, Ministry of Foreign Affairs Assistant Director for Political Affairs Patricia Kandolo has called for further collaboration at a bilateral, regional and multilateral level for the attainment of a conflict-free and peaceful Middle East. Ms. Kandolo notes that the subjugation of the continued suffering caused by the Israeli-Palestine conflict is long overdue and calls for leaders to foster the creation of a better and more prosperous world for young generations. She says this can only be attained through joint and consistent efforts from the international community and other concerned parties towards reconciliation and long-lasting peace.
I wish to take this opportunity to reaffirm the Zambian government's commitment towards a sustainable resolution to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, as well as towards our solidarity with the state of Palestine in its quest for self-determination. You will agree with me that the subjugation of the continued suffering caused by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is long overdue. It is for this reason that I cannot overemphasize the urgent need for us as leaders to foster the creation of a better and more prosperous world for the younger generation.
Meanwhile, in a speech read on his behalf by World Food Programme WFP Zambia Deputy Director J.U. Lee, United Nations Secretary Antonio Guterres has urged Israel and Palestine and others with influence to restore the promise and viability of the two-state solution premised on two states living side by side in peace, harmony and within secure and recognized borders, with Jerusalem as the capital of both. Mr. Guterres observes that the decades-long of Palestine's struggles for self-determination, independence and a life of dignity faces numerous challenges, including continued military occupation of Palestinian territory and the ongoing violence and incitement, among others.
The decades-long Palestinian struggle for self-determination, independence, and a life of dignity faces numerous obstacles, including continued military occupation of the Palestinian territory, ongoing violence and incitement, continued settlement construction and expansion, deep uncertainties about the peace process, and deteriorating humanitarian and economic conditions, particularly in Gaza. The UN Relief and Works Agency is providing indispensable services and needs our full support. I urge Israel, Palestine, and all others with influence to restore the promise and viability of the two-state solution, premised on two states living side by side in peace, harmony, and within secure and recognized borders, with Jerusalem as the capital of both. Let us reaffirm our commitment to upholding the rights of the Palestinian people and to building a future of peace, justice, security, and dignity for Palestinians and Israelis alike. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee.
And Palestinian ambassador to Zambia Walid Hassan has called on the United Nations Security Council to uphold its obligations and ensure that Israel complies and implements resolutions passed by the General Assembly. Ambassador Hassan is concerned that Israel has been allowed to continue behaving like it is above the law. Dr. Hassan says in 1947, when the resolutions were passed, Israel has never implemented any resolutions to the development he says has compounded the war situation between the two nations.
The Security Council must uphold its obligations and ensure that Israel complies with the United Nations resolutions. I would like to remind that Israel has not implemented any one of the hundreds of General Assembly resolutions. There are 705 resolutions issued by the General Assembly since 1947 to date, and 86 Security Council resolutions since 1948 to date. Not a single resolution has been implemented by Israel. We must reiterate, however, our deep regret about the lack of implementation of these resolutions, which has compounded the conflict over many decades and inflicted grave hardship.
We take a look at stories making headlines in our local news. President Edgar Lungu says he's heartbroken that only 2% from Zambia's abundant water resource is currently being harnessed for irrigation. And government has withdrawn the motor vehicle replacement allowance for government ministries effective January 1st, 2019 as a part of austerity measures. On that note, we come to the end of the news. From me, Diana Sumbwe. Thank you for watching.